Now, this is a different kind of vocabulary question. I did not talk about these in my main lesson on the vocabulary words and questions because there just aren't very many of these, but I'll give you a little kind of rough version. When they're asking for what this word most nearly means, they're going to be giving us a piece of literature or a poem, something where they don't need to leave a blank because the text already exists. It's a famous work of literature. So in theory, someone could know what word goes in the blank by having memorized the words to, Little Dorrit. But obviously no one has done that. But the point is they're not giving us a blank to fill because the word already exists there. So instead, what we're doing is just defining the word. But the way that these questions tend to work, these most nearly means questions, they are asking about words that are very common and that have multiple meanings, and then we have to use the context of the passage to figure out which meaning is correct. Now, sometimes it's pretty obvious. It's just like a very typical usage of the word, but on harder questions, and especially in the harder module, if we see these, it's very rarely the case that we are going to define this common word using the common definition. It's much more often an uncommon definition, but it's still one that you should be able to know based on the context of the passage. So regardless, think about what's going on around the word. Think about what else they're saying. You can still look for little other clues in other parts of the passage, but don't just pick the definition that's listed here in the choices that you just kind of think of first. You've got to go by the passage. So we're going to read it. I always skip the first sentence there because, I don't really care where it's from, but the second sentence might give me some information that's helpful. The narrator describes two siblings who, despite their poverty, maintain an inflated sense of their family's importance. So just diving into the passage then. If young John Shivery had had the inclination and the power to write a satire on family pride, he would have had no need to go for an avenging illustration out of the family of his beloved. He would have found it amply in that gallant brother and that dainty sister, so steeped in mean experiences and so loftily conscious of the family name. So right there I see a little symmetry. So ready to beg or borrow from the poorest, to eat or of anybody's bread, spend anybody's money, drink from anybody's cup, and break it afterwards. Well, I'll be totally honest. I did not fully understand what they're talking about here. A lot of these words kind of went in one ear and out the other without me really comprehending them, but that's okay. I kind of get what they're talking about. And just like any vocab question, if there's some sort of symmetry, some sort of repetition, try to focus on that. So they're steeped in mean experiences. So they're conscious of the family. Maybe so then something like conscious is going to go there, right? We can kind of just steal that word. But we can also just look at the answer choices and plug them in. And if one of them makes some sense, then that's probably it. So they're gradually soaked in experiences. Well, soaking something means kind of making it wet. And so that would be weird. You're kind of soaked in experiences, like you're soaked with water. So this doesn't make sense, but this is a very common definition of the word steep, because if you drink tea, one of the things you do is you take that tea bag and you steep it in the water until the water is tea, right? It kind of gets that dirtiness to it. So that's what steeping can normally mean, is you soak the tea bag in the water. So that's what they're going for. But there's no tea here. There's nothing being steeped in this case in some sort of liquid. Now, thoroughly immersed kind of means the same thing, right? If you're immersing the tea bag in water, it's kind of the same thing. But notice that's less literal, right? Soaking something involves wetness. Here, it could just mean it's kind of subsumed in it. So he would have found it amply in that gallant brother and that dainty sister. So immersed in mean experiences, and so loftily conscious of the family name, right? So you're conscious of something, you're aware of it, you're steeped in experiences, you're immersed in them. That seems reasonable, but let's look at the other choices. He would have found it amply in his brother and sister, so significantly inclined in mean experiences. That just sounds weird. If you're inclined to something, you're leaning towards doing it, right? But here I wonder if they're going for the idea of something is steep. It's like a steep trail. It goes up really fast. It's inclined, but there's nothing here that's very physical. So it's kind of just doesn't make sense. Don't force it in, basically. And then highly priced. Again, there's something about money here. So that probably doesn't make sense. They're highly priced in experience. It just doesn't make sense. So B is definitely the answer. I could see some people picking A here because it's more metaphorically, if you're soaked in something, you're kind of covered in it. So maybe they're kind of immersed in the experience in the same way that you're immersed in water. But another kind of good strategy for these nearly means questions is don't be metaphorical. Go with the most literal meaning of the word that you can. And so if something just kind of fits without you having to get all poetical about it, then just go with that. And I think that is maybe the main difference between A and B, is if B didn't exist, we might be able to stretch A and kind of be like, it's a metaphor and they're soaked in experience. They're kind of really in it. But don't do that if B exists to kind of convey that exact same meaning without that very literal physical description that we just don't have here. They're not wet. The brother and sister are not wet. There's no tea being drunk. A doesn't make sense.